We're here from Bringing Up Book Lovers. Today, homeschooling veteran and author Phyllis Wheeler, it's me,
and homeschooling mom, Sarah Boble, are here to prepare you for your next trip to the library. Today, we are talking about Alone by Megan Freeman. And be sure to stay tuned after the review for an interview with Megan. She'll be here with us.
Awesome. So I'm going to be asking Sarah some questions. So can you give us a little summary?
Sure. So we heard about this book from Kate Albus, who we talked to a few weeks ago, and she described it as a remake of The Island of the Blue Dolphins, which is, a classic, only it has modern characters in contemporary America. So there's a girl named Maddie. I think she's 12 when she starts, and she's kind of a stereotypical preteen, and she plans this secret sleepover with her friends. So she's tricking her parents to get to hang out with her friends overnight, and things get miscommunicated, and she ends up by herself, like her friends don't come. And then overnight, the whole town is evacuated, and the surrounding towns are all evacuated and abandoned, and she ends up alone because her parents don't know that she is not with the other parents. So she has to learn to survive, and without the things that she's used to, without modern comforts. And she figures out how to survive, but the experience of solitude is something that she finds to be a different kind of challenge. So that's kind of what the later part of the book is about. Most of the book is about, I would say. One thing that's different about this book than most books is that it's written in verse. So there's like a chapter for a chapter title, and then a short kind of poem about that title. So it's kind of like if you've ever read Inside Out and Back Again, it's kind of like that.
So does it pass the good story test?
Yeah, I think kids will really enjoy reading this. It kind of has that post-apocalyptic story feel, since the world as we know it as she knows it, has gone by the wayside. So I think kids would like reading about how she learns how to survive without internet and grocery stores, and how to be creative, and how she's resourceful. And she faces some real challenges, like there's looters and wild animals, just like in Island of the Blue Dolphins, and natural disasters. So those things keep the story exciting, and it keeps it moving along. So it's not just all kind of her introspection. There's a whole lot of action in it too. So I would say yes, does pass the good story test. So because it's kind of modeled after a story that's already a good story too.
So we worry about her future at certain points, right? Where like, oh, is she going to make it or whatever?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what about themes? What themes are you seeing?
Yeah. So like very early on in the book, the whole abandoned town thing happens pretty early on. So in the very beginning, the setup, Maddie's stepbrother is working on a paper about the book, Island of the Blue Dolphins, and he's supposed to answer the question, what is Karana's biggest challenge on the island? And initially, Maddie says her reaction is, well, getting food and shelter is the biggest challenge, because without those things, you can't really survive, right? But then after Maddie herself experiences the abandonment and she figures out how to survive, she gets to a point where she's not spending all of her time trying to just live. She starts to wonder like what really living is, if it's anything more than survival. And so loneliness is a big theme, and just the need for companionship and for other people to make life be significant. And I think the other probably main theme is just the need for hope in hard times. So there's one chapter where it's really short. She just lists all of these unknowns that she just has to believe in order to keep herself going. So mostly that her parents have, made it somewhere and are safe, that her parents are still, alive and they're thriving, and that they're looking for her. And ultimately that her story will end well. She has to believe these things that she can't have any certainty of. So in order to make her survival worth it, she has to choose to have hope in things that she can't be certain of. So I think those are probably the two main themes that come out of the book.
That was hope, and what was the other one?
Just kind of like something like loneliness and the need for uh for other people to be around to make your life, worth living. Not kind of like, you would die if you didn't have companionship, but she has some, significant moments in her life where there's there's nobody to be there for those things, and she wonders, are they really significant if there's nobody to kind of celebrate these things with? Um, yeah, so she struggles through some of those things.
So the character development, how does that go?
So when I first started reading it, I was kind of put off by Maddie. She seemed kind of like a stereotype of a preteen modern kid, and I was like, I don't know if I want my kid to read about this kid acting this way. She was a decently nice kid. She wasn't like a bad person, but she was, kind of shallow and self-centered and like a product of her culture in a lot of ways. Her parents are divorced and had each remarried, and at one point she comments on, how like some people put on the backs of their cars like the stickers that represent the members of the family. So they'll be like a dad sticker and a mom sticker and 3 kid stickers and a little dog or something like that. And she makes a comment that none of those stickers represent her family because she has a blended family. And she says something like, well, they can just kiss my ass. And she's just very cavalier about kind of being in the middle of her parents' separate lives. And she talks about it like it really doesn't matter. It doesn't bother her. But, throughout the story, there's a few times later where she kind of comes to the end of herself and she sheds the immaturity and grieves, those things. Like she wants her parents, she wants her nuclear family. Yeah. So just by force of having to grow up, because she has to, make it, not just survive, but also figure out how to make somewhat of a fruitful life for herself. She outgrows a lot of those things. So she changes quite a bit throughout the book.
So you think it captures what it feels like to be the main character?
Yeah, I think it was really well written that way. I think that this book would probably be good for slightly older kids, not like an 8 or 9 year old, because of some of the things that she struggles emotionally with. Um, but I think, kids that age understand the desire to like break away from their family a little bit, and like she did when she tried to plan that party and deceive her parents in the beginning. And then yeah, also she really does. I maybe because of the way it's written and like in verse, there's not a whole lot of time spent explaining her feelings, but they definitely come through. It's kind of sparse, and she's yeah, there's just not a lot of words wasted on it, but it definitely is communicated, how she struggles and what she's struggling with. um yeah, I think so.
What effect do you think the blank verse has on, like, you don't really see a long flowery description of anything.
Yeah,
So you think it's still able to do that you are there feeling?
I thought so. It reminded me a lot of Inside Out and Back Again. I don't know if you've read it. It's a girl telling her story about the year her family left Vietnam during the war and then resettled in the US. And it's also written that way. And I mean, I would like to ask the author why she chose to write it that way, but I didn't think that anything was missing from, from having fewer words in either of those books. I guess it didn't seem like, yeah, I didn't really miss anything from not having more description personally. Um, but I would like to know what we were supposed to gain from it at the same time.
Hmm. Wow. So memorable scenes. What do you think?
Uh, you know, so this was not actually a scene, but I had kind of an aha moment while I was reading, and I realized that I didn't remember the main character's name because nobody used it at all for such a long time because she was by herself. and nobody addressed her. So like when I realized that I forgot what her name was, it seemed to make the point to me that like she's kind of losing her identity a little bit because there's nobody around to acknowledge her. So yeah, a few pages after I realized that, she found a letter from her mom that her mom had written her several years before, and it had her name on it. And I was like, oh, that's what her name is. So that was, I guess, a memorable moment. There are a few parallels between this book and Island of the Blue Dolphins in terms of like she has a dog, and just like Karana did, and she faces some natural disasters just like Karana did. So I kind of noticed those things as I was reading. So those were memorable if you have a child who's read the other book as well.
So so that might make a good little discussion for literature class, like comparing the two books possibly.
Yeah.
So is there anything potentially controversial for homeschoolers?
So there were two instances where of language. I think, like I mentioned before, she said something about like, these people can kiss my ass. There's no like F-bombs. I think the other one was shit. I can't really remember actually. It's been a couple weeks since I read it. There's one point where she really does come to the end of herself, like this is it. She's having like a moment of major crisis, and she questions the existence of God, which some Christian homeschoolers may not like that. That didn't seem unrealistic given that she was at the very hardest point of her life and had no one to help her through it. Yeah, so there was that. Some people might want to talk to their kids about that. And there's a scene where Maddie, she gets her period for the first time. So she mourns the fact that like, in normal life, getting her first period would be kind of like a rite of passage, that she was something she would, talk to her mom about, and they would, kind of celebrate it together. But for her, it's just like this biological function. It's, it doesn't mean anything because it's just her, by herself experiencing this for the first time. So I think, a scene like that would be somewhat lost. The significance of it would be lost on a younger kid. Like, a 9-year-old boy reading this would not get that. Yeah. So those things, I would probably give this to my daughter when she's a little bit older than she is now. I tend to not have as many, qualms with things like questioning the existence of God, or, a little bit of curse words if she knows that, they don't align with what we believe. So
she's 9 now.
But those are the only things.
Yeah.
Yeah, so she's 9 now.
Okay. Well, I think that's probably good enough for now. I think we're going to go talk to our author very shortly here. So stay tuned.
Right. So we're here with Megan E. Freeman, author of Alone, and she's gonna, here we go, answer some questions for us. Phyllis and I talked about the book a little bit already. So the first question we like to ask is, what led you to write this book? Kate Albus was the one who told us about you and
nice.
And she described it as, yeah, she actually said telling us what it was about. She just said it's kind of a remake of Island of the Blue Dolphins, but I didn't know if that's how you intended it. So we were wondering where it came from for you.
Yeah, that's actually exactly right. And the entire idea originated from a mother-daughter book club that I was in with my daughter when she was in middle school. And we read Island of the Blue Dolphins as part of the club. And the girls were really fascinated by the notion of this young woman living alone on the island and having to survive. But they were really the girls in the club were really focused on the survival elements and how she would manage to find food and water and all those kinds of things. And it occurred to me in the conversation that unlike other survival stories like Hatchet, where he's dropped into this alien environment and has to figure it out, in Island of the Blue Dolphins, the girl is in her own home and she's been there, she's lived her whole life there. And so the challenges are different than some of the other survival stories that we love. And I said to the girls at that meeting, imagine if you came home from school tomorrow and your entire town had been evacuated and you were the only person there. What would you do first? And where would you get food? And what would you do, at night when there are no adults? And it changed the whole conversation. We had a really great discussion in our group.
Mm.
And then I couldn't shake that idea and that question. And I would drive around town and think, gosh, if I was 12 and I was the only human here, what would I go into that store? Would I take something that didn't belong to me? The whole premise, the whole notion really stuck in my head. And that's what led to writing the story.
So we did point out how it is different because you write in verse, and I noticed that you've written a book of poetry. So is that kind of what influenced? Because I talked about Inside Out and Back Again, which is another middle grade book written by a girl and written in verse. And so I was wondering what the main influences were and reasons were for writing it that way.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I first sat down to write it, I didn't write it in verse. I wrote the entire thing in prose, and I polished it, and I even queried it and tried to get an agent and put it out there in the world. And I got a lot of interest from agents because it's a compelling hook, it's an interesting premise. But the prose just wasn't up to snuff. The prose wasn't good enough. And I'd been a poet my whole life, but it never even occurred to me to write the novel in verse at that time. And I had read some novels in verse. They weren't quite as popular and ubiquitous as they are now. But it wasn't like I had never heard of them or anything. It just came out in prose the first time. And I went through a number of revisions, and I was actually sitting in a workshop with another author who was talking about her process writing her novel in verse. And it just hit me like, I need to rewrite this entire book. And so I went back to the drawing board and I rewrote the entire thing. And the verse really offered a lot of opportunities that the prose hadn't offered. It invited me in. Oh, and that was the other thing. It was originally in third person voice and past tense. And when I rewrote it in verse, I put it in first person voice and present tense. And it just opened up so many more opportunities to explore her experience and also to explore her internal life and her physical life, and not just the sort of external plot points, but also her emotional arc. And the story just became much more rich. And I was more fluent as a poet than I was in narrative prose because I'd written poetry for so much longer. So it was not obvious at first, but I got there eventually.
Yeah. Cool. I did have a question about Maddie. So she's a kid with divorced parents. I was wondering why you chose to make her family, like make her be, was it because it made the abandonment possible, or is there more to it?
Yeah, it initially, it was absolutely to help create the premise through which she could be left alone. And for any listeners who aren't familiar with the book, she lies to her mother and tells her mother she's going to stay at her dad's house. She lies to her dad and tells him she's going to be at her mom's house. And in fact, what her plan is to have a secret sleepover with her two best friends, and with no adults, and nobody will know that they're doing it, and they won't have any supervision. And the next day they'll go home and nobody will be the wiser. And at the last minute, her friends can't come. And so she is left alone. And that's the night that the town is evacuated and she's left behind. And I needed to figure out a way that she could be left behind, and that it was conceivable that her parents wouldn't realize for a long time that she had been left behind. And I knew that if she was from a family with two parents who lived together, there's no way they wouldn't notice that she wasn't there. But if she was with her parents, or if each of her parents thought she was with the other, and if they weren't able to communicate, then they could go for a long time and think that she was safe and sound with the other person and not actually know the truth. And so it was a device to facilitate the plot on some degree. But it was also, part of Maddie's experience is that she goes back and forth between her parents' houses every other week, and she has step siblings at one house and a half sibling at one house, and she's the only child at the other house. And she's in middle school, she's in 7th grade, and she's trying to figure out where she belongs and who she is. And by creating two homes, both of which are hers, but neither of which is permanent for her, I think it contributed to the possibility for her to explore those conversations. And then when she's left and she has the two houses, she ends up going back and forth between them because one is completely dependent on electricity for any kind of heat. And when the power goes out, she realizes I'm not gonna be able to survive a Colorado winter in a house where I can't create heat. But then she has her dad's house, which has an old fashioned wood stove, and she can have a fire in the fireplace. And so it provided a lot of opportunities for her to problem solve and for her to look at her relationships with her different parents and step-parents and her siblings in ways that turned out to be really rich, even though initially it was absolutely a device to create the situation that she could be left behind.
Okay. Interesting. So I noticed a few parallels between your book and Island of the Blue Dolphins, and I was wondering how much of Island of the Blue Dolphins you tried to put into your book.
Yep.
Like did you give her a dog because Karan had a dog and stuff like that?
The dog is such an interesting question because I absolutely looked at all those motifs in Blue Dolphins and examined whether or not I could use them or not. And so that's exactly what gave me the original idea. But I also discovered that when you only have one character in a story, if you don't give them something else to interact with, it's a much harder story to tell. And as soon as I introduced the character of the dog, George is a Rottweiler in Maddie's story, it was so much easier to write, because even though you can't have dialogue the way you can with two human characters, you can still have interaction. And Maddie talks to George a lot, and George gives her feedback, and there are interactions between them. And it made me appreciate very much I don't know if you ever saw the film Castaway with Tom Hanks. It was a long time ago, but there's that famous relationship that he develops when he's abandoned on that island. He washes up on that island when he finds the volleyball, and he names it Wilson, right? Because it's a Wilson brand volleyball. And he turns it into this being that he talks to and that he personifies and that he has conversations with. And as soon as I introduced George into the story and started writing scenes with Maddie and George, I realized why the screenwriters created Wilson, because it makes it so much easier to tell the story when the character has somebody to interact with, even if it's an inanimate object. So it was very much inspired by the relationship of the animals in Blue Dolphins, but it also really facilitated the development of Maddie's character to have that interaction.
Okay. Phyllis, did you have any questions?
Let's see, what is your most memorable scene, Megan?
That's a really interesting question. I actually really like a scene that I wrote much later in the process. One of the things I loved about the process of publishing the book with Simon & Schuster Aladdin was the opportunity to work with my editor, Kristen Gilson. And Kristen gave me really great questions and insights into ways to develop the story and make it richer. And one of the things she said was, we need to find more ways for Maddie to be an active agent in solutions and in furthering her situation and advancing her situation, because a lot of the story is her responding to what's happening around her, right? When there are natural disasters or when weather comes in or something like that, she's in reaction mode a lot of the book. And Kristen said, let's find things for her to do that she generates, where she's actively trying to improve her situation. And Kristen suggested, what if she were to try to grow her own food? What if she were to try to plant a garden? And so I wrote, there's a small section near the last 25% of the book where she plants a garden. She does research. She finds seeds in her grandfather's house, and she panics because she's afraid she's missed the growing season and she's never done it before, and she has to look it up. She's constantly going to the library because she has no other resources. There's no electricity to look anything up online. And she plants a garden, and she has a huge sense of satisfaction. And after eating canned food for many, 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 many months, to eat a fresh piece of food and the taste of the radish on her tongue, that was a really fun scene to write. And it was fun to live that vicariously through her. And it was a scene that, because it came so late in the process, it felt fresh to me, and I really enjoyed that experiment. And I think it works. I think it's a nice piece in the story.
I agree. I think it works. Yeah.
So this was your first middle grades book. Do you think you'll be writing more? Do you like this
Oh yeah.
group?
Yeah. Yes, I love this age group. I love doing school visits and talking to the readers and exploring with them what parts of the story resonate for them or what they might have done differently. I really love this whole age group. I was a teacher for a really long time and
Okay.
loved the middle grades and middle school as well. I have another middle grade novel that I am polishing right now, getting ready to send to my agent. And I have a work in pro, or I have a young adult manuscript that's out on submission right now as well. So I write
Okay.
sort of across both categories.
Yeah. Looking forward to that then.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you.
Um,
Thank you so much for
yeah.
coming to visit us. This is really
Oh, I'm happy
wonderful.
to.
Yeah,
I'm happy to. Thank you so
we
much for your
enjoyed,
interest. I appreciate it.
we enjoyed your book.
So for those of
Great.
you out there, next time you go to the library, or here, I can't get it in the middle. There you go. Check out Alone by Megan Freeman. It's a very exciting story to read, I thought, and I really enjoyed how it touched on, kind of her emotional life as well, and the struggles that, you imagine or don't imagine if you're a middle school kid thinking about
Right.
this topic. So thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Bye-bye.